I'd like to call the General Business and Finance meeting of April 1st, 2019 to order. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given by the clerk. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, the Town of Lincoln Committee and Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the public for attending the meeting this evening, and I just want to remind everyone of our rules for engagement, to please be respectful when others are speaking and to refrain from clapping. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak and are asked to stay focused on the agenda item. Please remember to silence all your cellular devices. Now for roll call, we have council to my left. We have our CAO, Mike Kirkopoulos. We have Councillor Paul McPherson, Councillor Mike Mikulik. Mayor Sandra Easton is a few moments late. We have Councillor Greg Reimer. To my right, I have Councillor John Pachariva, Councillor Tony Burdett, Councillor Diane Rajima, and Councillor Adam Russell. And all key staff are present this evening. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda. Tonight we have one delegation. Please note delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. I will ask council for a majority vote to permit Mr. Platakis to speak longer than 5 minutes. All those in favor? And that is carried. The first delegation tonight is Darren Platakis from Geospatial Niagara, providing a presentation regarding Niagara, Aspiring Global Geopark Project. I even practiced that, and I still think I said it wrong, but so Mr. Platakis, if you could please come forward. Thank you.
You want to lead us in a lesson?
Sure. Sego, Ani, Bujo Tanzi. What's up? Mine's Phil Davis. I'm Ganya Gahage Mohawk from the Haudenosaunee peoples. I've lived here in Niagara all my life. I've moved away a couple times. I keep moving back. It's home to me. I'm 55 years old. Seen the region change and flourish over the course of my lifetime, and I'm very happy and honored to be a part of this project as we move forward. Niagara is a Mohawk word. It means the neck between the two bodies of water, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Our peoples have been roaming this neck of the woods for quite some time. It's very evident in the trails going back to Lake Iroquois, going back to 12,000 years, evident in the museum in Fort Erie where all of the artifacts from the International Bridge are housed now. There's artifacts going back 12,000 years there, and they're from all over North America. It's always been a place of trade, and that's based on the black flint vein that still comes out of Lake Erie. It's always been something that's been used as a tool of trade. Peoples all over this great continent, Turtle Island, that we live on. With our peoples too, the Haudenosaunee, when we get started our business, we always talk about the words that come before all else, and those words are to remind us of where we really stand in this world as human beings. Without everything else that exists, we wouldn't exist. And I'd just like to give a little short Reader's Digest version in English, just to give you an idea of what it is. And we use these words to open and close meetings, to keep us humble, to keep our feet on the ground, and remember that we do have a relationship with everything in nature. We give greetings, love, and understanding to the peoples of the earth, to the streams, the pools, the lakes, to the trees, and the forest for the usefulness, to the corn, the fruits, the medicines, to the animals that provide us with pelts and give themselves as sustenance for us, to the great winds and the lesser ones, to to our eldest brother, the sun, our grandmother, the moon, to all the celestial bodies, and to our peacemaker, and to the messengers of Creator who reveal his wishes to us, and to Sangoyan Diso, Creator, who is the ruler of all health and life. So, Nyawago, thank you for that. And I'll let Mr. Buchanan take over from here.
Thanks, Phil. So I'm Darren Platicus. I am the founder and CEO of an educational nonprofit called Geospatial Niagara. Also joining me is our Indigenous Culture Liaison for the Niagara Steering Committee, Phil Davis, and in the gallery, Mr. Ian Lucas, our Board Secretary of Geospatial Niagara and part of the Niagara Steering Committee, as well as Carol Phillips, who wrote the Niagara Community Observatory policy paper on global geoparks. And I want to thank you each for inviting us to present today. Geoparks are a unified geographical area where sites and landscapes of international geological significance are managed with a holistic concept of protection, education, and sustainable development. They're a bottom-up approach of combining conservation with sustainable development while involving local communities, and these are becoming increasingly popular. A gentleman by the name of Patrick McKeever, who is the former director of Earth Sciences at UNESCO, has a great definition of geoparks that I wanted to share. And those are special places around the world that not only tell part of the history of the planet, but also celebrate how our geological heritage is linked to other types of heritage. And this forms the basis of community empowerment and the promotion of the area's economic or sustainable economic development. Currently, there are 3 UNESCO Global Geoparks in Canada. In 2010, on the bottom left, Stonehammer Global Geopark. In 2014, on the right, Tumbler Ridge Global Geopark in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. And in 2018, the most recent one is in Percé, Quebec. Just recently designated and will be coming online for about 2020 is Discovery Geopark in Newfoundland and the Cliffs of Fundy Geopark in Nova Scotia. Currently, there are about 6 aspiring global geoparks across Canada, and we are about one of those. 3 of them are in Ontario. It's ourselves, Sudbury, called Big Impact, Aspiring Global Geopark. And there's also an aspiring geopark in Ontario, a Quebec border, the Temiskaming Rift Valley. Each and every global geopark strives to incorporate and promote the global geopark pillars within their respective geoparks management plans. These include education, sustainable responsible tourism, cultural awareness, and geoconservation and geotourism. So you might be asking yourself, why Niagara? UNESCO encourages cooperation with existing UNESCO designated areas such as the World Biosphere, building upon relationships across Canada and around the world, sharing best practices and other forms of research and programming. Promotion and education as it relates to culture is particularly important in the establishment of a UNESCO Global Geopark, especially for our local Indigenous communities, but other cultures as well that now call Niagara home. Do you have anything you wanted to add? Oh, okay, good. The Niagara Escarpment has driven our earliest industry and provides the perfect climate, making us Canada's fruit belt. Our wines are world-renowned, and our craft beers and spirits are increasing in popularity. The Welland Canal exists because of the escarpment. As well, stone for the construction of the historical canal locks and also for the construction of our most prominent buildings came from the Niagara Escarpment. From farmers markets to hiking and cycling, Niagara is fast becoming a 4-season experience and is much more than the typical tourist sees. Niagara is on the forefront of research in agricultural sustainability and a host of other disciplines that are prominent in other global geoparks around the world. Designation would provide another incentive for our post-secondary institutions to attract master's and postdoctoral students, as well as the associated research. Specific to Lincoln, we have Falls Falls and downtown Beamsville, the Vineland Research Center, 20 Valley Tourism, the festivals, the wine routes, farmers markets, Charles Daly Park, and the Brock Lincoln Living Lab itself as a research institution. The application process consists of first of a formal self-evaluation, and then an application gets sent to the Canadian Committee for Global Geoparks, which we're hoping to do by the end of December of 2020 or into the first quarter of 2021. The Canadian Committee reviews it and then does a site visit and would come in summer of 2021. That application is then updated with recommendations throughout 2022. And that is when we are actually operational as a global geopark, an aspiring global geopark for 1 year. And then we begin to negotiate when we would be submitting that application to UNESCO itself. UNESCO would do a summer evaluation in 2023 with the hopeful designation coming in 2024. Some of the promotional awareness opportunities that are upcoming. In 2020, the 10th International Cool Climate Wine Symposium is happening at Brock University. And we're all aware of the 2021 Canada Summer Games that will be making extensive use of our cycling infrastructure as well as our other tourism infrastructure. In 2024, there is a total solar eclipse that will be going right over the Niagara region. If you're familiar with the last total solar eclipse that went right across the United States, a lot of tourism opportunities happened along that transect of that eclipse. And the most recently announced is the 2026 World Cup that is going to be having a number of games in Toronto. So in conclusion, the Niagara Aspiring Global Geopark is an opportunity for all of Niagara to work together to promote what makes our communities and region unique among other UNESCO global geoparks. It's to educate ourselves and the world about the region humanity has called home for 12,000 years. We are truly unique from the ground up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to our council members for any questions to our delegation. First, I have Councillor Regima.
Thank you, Chair Timmer. So a little clarification. So the proposal is to designate all of Niagara as a geopark, and the process is that it be designated for a year, and then what happens after that?
The application process between being submitted to the Canadian Commission for UNESCO and the actual UNESCO organization, you have to operate as essentially a global geopark for that year. So that illustrates to UNESCO your commitment to the project, as well as to the commitment that you have made with other community organizations, municipal governments, education, academia, that sort of thing.
So are you going around to all of the 12 municipalities and speaking about it? One question. Another question, to operate as a geopark, can you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
So to answer your first question, through you, Chair, we are going to other municipalities as well as other community organizations. We have a presentation coming up on Thursday to the Rotary Club in St. Catharines. I'm doing a presentation at the Niagara Falls Museum in early May. Pretty much any organization that wishes for us to come and speak to them, we are more than willing to do. With respect to your second question, to refresh my memory, it's basically how you operate as a global geopark?
Yes.
Okay. So global geoparks are made up of a series of geosites. And a geosite could be anything from a geological outcrop of rock, but it could also be a cultural center as well. So, for example, Balls Falls could be one. So it's the geology in Balls Falls lent itself to the mills and things like that, which drove our industry in the early 1800s. The sites are connected with each other in terms of sort of their propensity for education, their propensity for integration between the cultural heritage and geological heritage as well. So Balls Falls would be one, Cave Springs could be another. The well and canals are essentially a geosite network. Obviously Niagara Falls, Niagara Glen, Wood End Conservation Area, Wainfleet Bog, anything that can tie the geology that we have with the culture, indigenous culture as well, to promote the tourism aspect of those sites.
Yeah, okay, so some of the stuff we're doing already, a lot of stuff we can improve on. So you've probably heard that we're undertaking a tourism strategy right now, that we're going to be establishing one.
I believe
so-
I've heard about that, yeah.
Yeah, so this is going to be interesting. I'd like to see this incorporated and considered as part of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Councillor Rajima. Can you turn off your mic, please?
Yeah.
We have Councillor Bernay next.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. Thank you for your presentation this evening. Very intriguing. I guess my only question would be, and it's not to be anything more than just curious, obviously when you decide that you want to go after something like this, and as the CEO and founder of Geospatial, like, is this something that's been a passion of yours for decades? What's prompted it? When I look at the timeline and you're looking at the opportunities, and certainly throughout your presentation, it rings very true. Why Niagara? And you've hit on all those things of why not Niagara. But when I look at, things in the timeline for opportunities, some of them are banging on the door 2020, and then some are way out there with the eclipse and stuff like that. So just curious as to the mindset on how one wakes up and says, let's get on this project.
Through you, Chair, how much time do you have?
Well,
It's up to these guys.
Personally, I've been working on this since about 2014. And I don't even remember how I stumbled upon it, but I stumbled upon the Stonehammer Global Geopark website in St. John, New Brunswick. And I immediately, with what they were doing, I immediately saw like all these lights started going off about how applicable this could be to Niagara and why, and how on earth are there only, at the time, there were only 2 global geoparks in Canada. And I should point out that there's also only 7 in the entire Western Hemisphere. So right now there's 3 in Canada, soon to be 5. There's 2 in Mexico and 2 in South America. And the vast majority of them are in Southeast Asia and in Europe. And these are bucket list destinations. And we already have that draw that is Niagara Falls, but a lot of people don't really go outside of Niagara Falls. It's Niagara Falls, and then they spend maybe 1 or 2 days, and they don't fully explore what Niagara has to offer. So I reached out to the executive director, her name is Gail, at Stonehammer, and I said to her, like, how did you do this? Like, what's involved in doing this? And part of being a global geopark, it's beholden to you to assist other places to become global geoparks. So she immediately opened up a Dropbox folder and dumped every stitch of application materials that they had into that Dropbox folder. And I can email any global geopark around the world and ask for the same thing, and they will provide copies of their applications, copies of their their board makeup, their management plans, things like that, anything that would assist us in becoming a UNESCO Global Geopark. I should also reiterate that global geoparks are not a static designation like a World Biosphere or a World Heritage Site. They're a designation that has to be recertified every 4 years. So you have to have a consistent improvement on your geopark, whether that's through the connections you make in the community or whether it's the programming that you're offering to the community or to the tourist, and also within the education system. So in the last year, a little over a year now, it's truly picked up steam, and it's kind of overwhelming at some points in time. But to see where it's come from since I had that idea, or I stumbled upon their website in June of 2014, then it's just been an amazing ride. And I'm super passionate about this project. I mean, it's one of a couple passion projects that I have with Geospatial Niagara, but it's definitely up there with what I see it meaning to Niagara as a community, not a series of 12 municipalities, but as a geographic area.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, next we have Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Darren and Phil, as well, for your presentation. I learned something with that Niagara. I thought that was pretty neat. Couple questions. What differentiates yourselves from the Niagara Escarpment Commission? I see it as being very similar in the purpose or the thought process, but what do these other geoparks that we have currently, do they have some sort of governing body similar to the Niagara Escarpment Commission?
Through you, Chair. The Niagara Escarpment Commission would be a partner, or we're hoping to. We have a presentation of them in July. They would be a partner with Niagara to be as the geopark. Considering they are also part of the World Biosphere Reserve, we would be promoting the World Biosphere more than it does in Niagara, as well as working with them for educational outreach and things like that with respect to the World Biosphere. So the scope of the geopark is only the boundary of currently of the political boundary of the Niagara region. That's not to say that at some point in time we can't stretch into say Hamilton and Haldimand for the watershed boundary, or it also doesn't preclude us from doing a transnational global geopark and working with organizations in New York State as well. What was the second part of the question? Sorry. The governing body.
Yeah.
So the governing body for the global geopark, Niagara Global Geopark, would be, it's a nonprofit organization that has to be established with the board of directors. And there would be essentially the board of directors, but there would also be a series of advisory committees, whether those be for geology, tourism, research, community engagement, education, and the like.
Okay. thank you.
Which the Niagara Escarpment Commission would be a part of.
Okay, so they're, through you, thank you, through you, so they're aware of, they're involved, they're aware of your application and your
Yes.
solicitation?
Yep.
Okay, and through you, one more question. I see a word, modest funding. I'm gonna be that guy. What sort of funds, what sort of budget would be expected? Is there any idea or is there any thought as far as what sort of funding or how much is this going to cost?
I would like to defer to
If you can estimate.
my colleague Ian. He's been working on that.
Alrighty, thank you. Nice to meet you, Ian.
Nice to meet you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. You're welcome.
When anyone asks a money question, I have to stand up, so. We are seeking funding. We actually just recently got some funding commitment from the NPCA. and we've had quite a bit of, about $35,000 worth of in-kind funding from various organizations in Niagara. We're going to be looking for Trillium funding, and we will be coming back to you at some point, we don't know exactly when yet, and asking for you to not just fund, but also potentially provide input into the development of the Geopark. So there will be a funding request. We anticipate it being in total for all 12 municipalities less than $100,000. So it's not a large amount of money. But, and we expect it to be prorated by population and so forth. We've got our plan, our fundraising plan at the moment is targeting a total for the next 2 years of about just over $450,000. We don't expect to get all of that, but that's what we're targeting from the organizations, from Trillium, and also commercial revenue as well. We're looking at initial commercial partners who want to be part of the growth. We've already got in-kind commitments from Scotiabank Convention Center in Niagara Falls. They've been instrumental in helping us and providing in-kind and effectively cash contributions to help us get this thing moving. So there will be an ongoing process of fundraising. I hope that answers your question.
That's better than I expected.
We'll be issuing more detail as we go, and we'll be seeking board membership as soon as the incorporation is completed. We've just got a commitment from a reputable law firm in St. Catharines that's doing the legal side of the incorporation and so on. And once that's done, we'll be coming to ask for board member commitments from the municipalities. Not from every municipality, but hopefully the municipalities can get together and assign people who have a particular passion for this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, very good.
Through you, thank you. If I could ask just one more question. With regards to, you don't seek to be a legislative or you don't seek to be a regulatory, but would this be a sort of organization whereas, let's supposing, looking on your website, you know, there's some kayakers, and if there was a business that wanted to, let's say, start up a kayaking or start up some sort of eco-tourism, would this be a further organization that would have to approve that application, or just to be clear on that?
Through you, Chair, that they would not have to clear it through us.
Through Geopark, okay.
It's a non-legislated boundary.
Okay, perfect.
So provided they
Meet
the municipal, regional, provincial, federal, indigenous laws, we would like them to be a part of the global Geopark with us, and perhaps co-brand with us, or because we can. The Geopark designation is essentially a global marketing brand, so we would help them by promoting them, and vice versa. Hopefully.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we have Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the delegation. I think I'm going to pick up right where you left off there on your marketing piece. And, you know, looking at some of the numbers you've got in your presentation, that they're just unbelievable. Tumbler Ridge went from 2,000 visitors in 14 to 17,000 in 17, and then the Maple Arch went from 3,015 to 60,000 in 17. So help me understand that as far as, you know, look, what changed to have that kind of growth? I mean, it's fabulous, but what happened?
So through you, Chair, with respect to Tumbler Ridge was like a mining and forestry town, where when the mining and the forestry dried up, they needed to do something, so they tackled tourism, is where it was at for them. And they're a unique situation because they never really had any tourism to speak of before that. It might have been like drips and drabs, but becoming a global geopark was sort of their baseline. When they first became a global geopark, the visitors that came specifically because they were a geopark, that was their baseline. And they do a lot of engagement because there really is no distinction between the Tumbler Ridge Global Geopark and the municipality of Tumbler Ridge. They're so intricately entwined with each other. So they were able to capture those numbers. So it was really the fact that they are a UNESCO Global Geopark, and they marketed beyond belief. With the respect to Marble Arch Global Geopark, they built, as you can imagine, at Marble Arch, there's some pretty sensitive geology there. And what they did is they built a boardwalk that allows visitors to actually go along this sensitive geological area. They built it all sustainably as well. And it's just their numbers that they're collecting as people are going out on that boardwalk. So they have the ability to capture the volumes of people that are attending that site.
So Tumbler Ridge made a significant investment in tourism. Is that
I
what
would
I'm
say
hearing?
that because any investment in tourism for them would be significant because they never really invested in it before. Because forestry and mining was where it was at for them. There might have been a little bit, but nothing
Right,
extraordinary.
and to get the numbers they're getting, they enhance that tourism with the
The geopark.
Geopark designation.
Correct.
Okay, and if I may, Madam Chair, so what would change at Balls Falls? Or would there be any change? And to try to give me a picture of, we designate Niagara as a geopark.
Mm-hmm.
What, is it just on a website somewhere, or is there a plaque that goes up at Balls Falls? What happens?
So a geosite would have an associated educational plaque. Some of them already exist. Others would be expanded upon. There would be a Global Geopark logo attached to that as well. It would be promoted online as well as in situ in the park itself. But that Global Geopark designation there for that geosite would also point visitors to other geosites in Niagara as well, whether it's Wainfleet Bog or Cave Springs, that sort of thing. Again, the idea is that of the numbers, the actual number is escaping me, but I think it was like somewhere upwards of 14 million, or maybe it was 140 million people that visit Niagara Falls every year, or visit that stretch of Niagara on the Lake Niagara Falls. I'm not certain how many of those actually get out into the broader community of
Right.
Niagara.
Right.
And that's the goal, is to draw them out. Instead of them staying one day or 2 days, they're now staying for 3, 4, and 5 to experience everything that Niagara has to offer.
Good, no, that's outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, or Madam Chair. Now you're the mayor.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the delegation. I think it was a fabulous presentation. I think any opportunity you can layer on another layer of tourism onto any industry is obviously something that is very intriguing. Just a couple quick questions. How many other municipalities or groups have you already presented to, and what was the reaction or feedback from those others?
Through you, Chair, we have presented to, and please feel free to jump in if I've missed any. We have presented to the MPCA. We presented to West Lincoln in January, Welland last November, Pelham earlier this month, or in March. As I said, we're presenting to Rotary in Thursday, the Niagara Falls Museum in May. So we're getting out there as much as we can. I mean, I work a full-time job, so it's kind of hard to get out during the day. We've met with the sustainability organizational part of the Canada Summer Games to hopefully do some cross-promotion with them. We've met with the Mayor of St. Catharines and the Director of Parks and Recreation as well. We have some information here, the policy briefing that was done through the Niagara Community Observatory, Carol Phillips, so I can leave these here with you if you would like to have a copy of those if you don't have one already. And yeah, so our next step would be Port Colborne, Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, Niagara on the Lake, Thorold, Grimsby.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Sorry, just to add, so just to let you know, St. Catharines wants to have the first geo site in the Geopark. We met with the mayor again last week, and he, in fact, was almost 2 years ago now, was the host of the first sort of public Geopark meeting that we had in Niagara. He hosted it for us in the library, St. Catharines. So he wants to be first. So if there's a competition, if you want to be second, or if you want to be first, there's an opportunity there. So.
And two more questions, Madam Chair, through you. How many geosites, both physical and cultural, do you foresee in the Niagara region?
For Niagara, we are looking at approximately between 24 to 36 geosites to start off with. Currently, we have a list of about 118 that we have to whittle down to specific areas and sort of the more prominent and the more like educational opportunities that they provide as well.
And my last question, Councilor Mikulik already touched on it, goes to the funding. So maybe Mr. Lucas, if you want to jump back to the mic.
I'll see how bad it is.
You mentioned there'd be some startup funding. Is there also an ongoing contribution that would be part of the program, or is it just that 100,000 split between municipalities and participating groups to start up and get your designation, or is there also an ongoing contribution that you're expecting?
We haven't discussed the ongoing. I believe it's our intention that we're not coming back to municipal councils on a yearly basis to ask for funding because part of it is the sustainability aspect of it, and we want it to be self-sustaining. So whether that's through, I mean, I wouldn't turn down a donation from Lincoln if you were going to make one. Let's put it that way. But our goal is that it's self-sustaining where our funding comes from within the community, whether it's private donor or a corporate sponsorship, or even like family members, like family memberships or student memberships or personal memberships and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Next, we have Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for coming this evening. I think you hit the nail on the head that Niagara is more than Niagara Falls. And it's that impetus of trying to get that tourist to stay a few more hours, one more night, because there's so many more things here to see. Have you thought about approaching the Regional Tourism Organization? Because, I mean, this is right up that alley, knowing that they get $4 million annually from the province.
I have tried to set up meetings.
Okay.
As of yet, have been unsuccessful, but I'm more speaking with the DMOs themselves, first of all.
Okay.
So whether it's 20 Valley or whether it's St. Catharines or that sort of thing, and then sort of work our way up to that
Okay.
Level.
Okay. And then 2 years ago, in March of 2017, I was on the region's cultural committee, and we received a presentation from a group in Niagara on the Lake that were looking to designate Niagara on the Lake as a UNESCO
World Heritage Site.
cultural landscape. Are you guys working together? Is that something completely different?
Did you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, that's through Tim Johnson, I believe it was. And they've been working on that. They're still working at doing cultural mapping, and I've yet to see any public info about that or sit down and have a meeting with them.
Okay.
That is in my plans in the future and looking at furthering the cultural aspects of the region.
Okay, because they were supposed to go to Parks Canada in 2017 to get this designation, because it was when the glacial advance came, it was, that safe haven. So just, yeah. And back to the geological significance of Balls Falls. And I think that's why we should be second on your list. And we could have been first had you asked us, because it's got the, going back to my geology textbook, it's got the same substrata as Niagara Falls, and you can identify it. And if you have a hike up in behind Balls Falls, there's still limestone kilns there. And I mean, the possibilities are limitless of restoring that, you know, taking the bottle of hydrochloric acid, of course, under supervision, with those kids and putting it on the pieces of limestone and watching it fizz and explaining to it, you know, that it used to be the glacial lake shore of the Lake Iroquois and things like that. So, I mean, I think you got a home run. I really do. And you know, any help that we can do, from my background and my aspect, I'd be willing to help.
If I may comment, like, there's an entire landscape that even citizens of Niagara don't see and appreciate. So it's just as much about local tourism
Yeah.
and local education as it is about global education. So when you think of a series of 36 geosites across the Niagara region, you know, global geoparks are bucket list destinations, and people aren't going to travel here to visit half of the geosites. They'll want to see all of them while they're here, because they don't know when they're going to be coming back. But we want to make it such that once they see it, they're going to want to come back to see sort of what's next.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and also too, that, you know, the whole project is about us helping ourselves help each other. And we have many, many different aspects from a cultural point of view. And we have the escarpment, we have the QEW, we have the number 8 highway. Just those three are our original trails that we used to, that they were formed from. And they run through almost every single part of Niagara region too. And even just further on into Lake Erie too. There's more of our trails up there. Just the history that's involved in there is a lesson. You know, teaching you guys what Niagara is, where that come from, what it means. You know, that's just a small taste of what potentially to come and how it will assist further on down the road.
Okay. Seeing no other questions? So thank you very much for your presentation, and I had just a couple of, I think most of my questions were answered, although I had read that it would be a 4-year designation,
Yes,
not a 1-year, so.
correct.
a
It's
four-
operating pre-UNESCO designation. You're operating still under your aspiring Geopark designation, and then once you get that designation, it's 4 years.
Oh, okay, I see.
And then immediately the next day that you're designated, you're working on your recertification.
Okay, so the goal here is to designate Niagara as a geopark. And I heard you say that St. Catharines has already wants to be the first one. And what I'm wondering is there certain criteria to decide who's the first one and who's the second? How will you choose those locations?
You wanna take
That's
that?
what I would like to know. I was just wondering, like, does archaeology and wildlife and habitats and the culture, history and culture, does that come into play as well?
Completely, yes.
So will you be looking at, in making your decision?
Well, we have to decide on which geoparks we start with. We can't start with 100 geosites. We can't start with 118. We have to be realistic and have about between 30 and 40 probably. A minimum of 2 in every municipality.
Okay.
Right? That has to be the case, and they have to be high profile, and you have to want those as part of your municipal geosites. NPCA, as part of their funding approval, gave us access to all of their geosites. So Balls Falls is naturally on that, along with all the other ones that they have. Plus, they've given us access to all and use of all their images and their cultural and historical, scientific content that they have. They have a massive amount of information that never seems to bubble to the surface. So we're going to try and do that, get some more of that more interesting stuff and publish that. The going back to who's going to be first, there has NPCA was vying for Balls Falls, and but St. Catharines came and they've sort of offered us a property on DeQ at the Morningstar Mill to have as our sort of centralized office. That's what they're dangling. So I don't know what you're
Wow.
prepared to dangle here, but no, I'm being facetious, you know that. But that's how it's come about.
I see.
But Bulls Falls is a natural, almost a sort of a co-number one as far as we're concerned. It just makes so much sense. Plus, my daughter is getting married there in June, so, you know.
Well, I tend to agree.
But my
Falls
daughter's
Falls.
getting married?
No,
in June?
Falls
Oh,
Falls.
sorry.
It's a beautiful,
I'll
beautiful
tell her.
location for that, for sure. But are there any, I see Mary Easton would like to comment.
Thank you very much, Darren and gentlemen, for coming. I think I've heard this 3 times now, but it's very, it has such, there's just so much to it. Every time, you know, there's a little bit more. So I wanted to let you know, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your first name. Phil. So Phil, since we met, I haven't been asleep at the switch, and Mr. Kirkopoulos and I, and the mayors of Grimsby and West Lincoln went to meet with Van Spadaway. So we wanted to talk to the MP about the trails and developing a system of identifying the trails and creating a map of the trails. And I'm sorry that I can't find the young lady's name, but I do have a name, and I have a meeting set up with a young woman, I believe she's Métis, and she's working on some indigenous elements, and so I'm going to be talking to her about how we can develop this. So the idea is to potentially set up a methodology for doing the mapping and then going to the federal government before the next election to get some money to do that. Because this is a pretty important part of the entire area. So it goes way beyond Grimsby, obviously, but it certainly would be quite fabulous to have it, to have those trails mapped out in Niagara. So we're working away at it. This is very exciting, so thank you very much. Yeah, you should, I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to meeting with her. It's great. So, I mean, now you've learned a lesson tonight. Don't ever tell any municipalities what other people are doing. There's never any competition.
Thank you, Mary Easton. So just final comments. So what do you need from us, and what are the next steps?
We'd really like to get your endorsement, official endorsement, that we can use and take to other municipalities to tell them what you're doing. Seriously, you know, that's important.
They make up the application. Endorsements make up a portion of the application.
Yeah, the application is really, it's all about what partners do you have, what's their commitment, and so forth. So if we could start with, you know, with that endorsement, that would be really, really very much appreciated. Thank you, if you can.
Okay.
I think that's a great way to start. And then if possible, if there is someone you want to designate within the town that we can sort of have as a liaison in terms of keeping them informed or keeping you informed. Does that make sense? Is that logical?
Yes.
Then we can as we're moving quickly now. We're really moving much faster than we were just a few weeks ago. So we want to keep all of the partners informed on what's happening. So those 2 things, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. I think our CAO, did you have a comment around that, or?
Through you, Madam Chair, I did not have a comment
No?
other than to suggest that I don't mind being that liaison to work with the Geopark group here and Geospatial in terms of anything that they need.
Very good. So we have a liaison person. So, and I see Councillor Mikulik, did you have another question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say one more thing, just through all of this discussion. Councillor Pachariva had mentioned earlier with regards to the tourism board, and then regarding, you know, who funds this board, who steers this board, who guides that tourism board. And I would recommend that staff perhaps maybe gets in contact with that tourism board to encourage that meeting that you guys have been seeking, however, not been, receiving answers to. So if that's possible.
Okay,
to add
Counselor,
that.
we're gonna be, we have a request that's coming up in our motion, so, for a staff report, maybe that would encompass that as well. Mr. CIO, did you? have a
Through you,
comment?
Madam Mayor, there is a, oh, sorry, through you, Madam Chair, I apologize.
I didn't hear what you
Thankfully, the
said.
mayor didn't hear me. I called you Madam Mayor.
I didn't hear.
I apologize, Madam Chair. So, yeah, I think we are going to be coming back with a report, but I think in the meantime, I think there, an ability to see what we can do in terms of facilitating a meeting with the Tourism Partnership Network in terms of getting you some face time there, because I think they receive significant amounts of funding from the province of Ontario, and this is a phenomenal undertaking from a tourism perspective. So, again, if there's anything we can do, I will make sure to work with our staff here and anything from your perspective and your end to help with that.
Okay, very good, thank you.
If I may.
Yes?
I wanted to inform you as well that from the 16th until the 19th of May, a gentleman by the name of Patrick McKeever is going to be visiting us here in Niagara, and he is the gentleman that actually brought the Global Geopark network under the umbrella of UNESCO. So if you, it'd be like the Geopark equivalent of the Pope coming to visit your community. So we are planning on having some form of a workshop of sorts at Balls Falls during that time, probably on the 17th. We realize that it's the May long weekend, but this was the only time that he was going to be available to come and visit us, because he's traveling from Quebec City to us, and then he's headed off to Tumbler Ridge, so on the 19th. So we'll keep you informed about that.
That's really good. Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for coming out this evening, and it's very interesting, and yeah, we've got a motion coming up next to follow, so thank you very much. So if no other questions, I'd like to bring a staff direction forward to receive presentation provided by delegation Darren Platakis as information, and that council endorse the geospatial Niagara Global Geopark project, and that council direct the Economic Development Officer to report back at a future committee meeting in 2019 on the results of the UNESCO Global Geopark designation for the town of Lincoln, and that a letter be written in support of the Geospatial Niagara Global Geopark project, and that it be circulated to the local area municipalities. I will require a mover. Councillor Pachariva. All those in favor? Oh. Mary Easton?
Madam Chair, just in terms of the circulation, it would be a good idea, in light of Councillor Mikulic's comments, to copy the tourism, I don't know the proper name of that board, but, and by sending it to all of the other municipalities, by seeing the CCing, they'll get the message that there needs to be a nudge here.
Okay, thank you. And
Thank you.
I think our CAO has something to add here.
Through you, Madam Chair, why don't we just make a friendly kind of addition here and say all local area municipalities and appropriate agencies, because I think also circulating it to some of the other agencies we spoke of this evening is probably also helpful in terms of that endorsement.
Okay. Okay, so we've amended that motion to read to the local area municipalities and appropriate agencies. Okay. We had a mover, Councillor Pachariva moved, and I would like to take a vote. Everyone in favor? And that motion is carried. All opposed? None. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. night. Okay, so under the consent agenda, we've come to the consent portion of the agenda, which has one item, item 6.1. I think it was. No, I was just gonna wait and let them finish. Sorry? That's okay. Okay. All right, I'll just repeat that. We've come to the consent portion of the agenda, which has one item, item 6.1, memorandum regarding regional incentive funding. I would like to motion that this item be lifted from the consent agenda and place it on the regular agenda as item 7.4, for consideration. Okay? So now under regular agenda, we are considering item 7.1, FN 05-19, mobility fleet replacement and service agreements. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson?
Are we going to come back to the memo? Is that the plan?
I've
Okay,
placed it,
okay.
I've placed it to 7.4,
The memo.
yes.
Okay, so I do have a question on this mobility fleet. And the question, maybe through to Mr. Brown, is with regards to, in the report, you call out the average age of cell phones is 3 years. And then further in the report, you talk about the system that was used was when they were up for redo, that's when we did them. So I'm a little confused in the report as to, are we replacing all of the cell phones that have run to term, or are we replacing all cell phones?
Thank
Go
you, through
ahead.
you, Mr. Chair. All of our phones are 3 years old, so all of the phones we have in our fleet are 3 at this point. At the 2-year mark, we came to with a budget ask to replace them last year. That didn't make the final cut for budget, so all of the phones we have in our fleet were extended a 3rd year. So now the entire fleet is at 3 years today.
Okay, good, that answers that question. And secondly, is 2 years realistic anymore? With the changes in phones being somewhat minimal now, cameras are not changing that drastically as they were. Memories are good. I think many companies have gone to a 3-year cell phone usage. It's not 2 years anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something we considered. What we did in the past, not this time because it was extended, what we've done is we've kept the phones that get replaced after 2 years, and we use those sets for parks and camps and part-time staff that don't necessarily need that top-of-the-line phone, and they use the ones that have done a 2-year service but are still good enough for some more simple, lower-end uses.
Not sure that answered the question I'm asking. So, I'm all good with the 3-year turnover. For the next turnover, are we moving to a 3-year turnover, or are we staying on a 2-year turnover?
That's going to be for budget, for council consideration at budget. We're recommending 2 years because we're seeing between the 2nd and 3rd year a pretty significant spike in repairs and replacement. We've had to actually create a special account for this 3rd year just to cover all the phones that have died because we've gone over the 2-year kind of recommended length for the cell phone life for additional repairs and maintenance. If you'd like a report to come back that has those numbers, how much it costs us for that extra year versus the first 2 years, that'd be very easy to put together. We have the numbers.
Yeah, I just, from my personal experience, it seems like, cell phones aren't being replaced as often as they were because the technology is not changing significantly. So,
For sure.
I think it would make sense to look at a little longer period And I don't think 3 years is outrageous to look at from a brand-new phone to a replacement.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all to put that together.
Okay.
You know, per the council's decision,
Right.
or recommendation.
Thank you. Counselor Miklick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, I'm curious, like, so 118,644.15. What exactly is that number buying? What is that? My understanding, being a layperson, is I sign a 3-year contract, I get a free phone as long as I spend 60 to 80 bucks a month on that phone. So what's the upfront, or is this an annual, or is this an overall cost?
So there are two lines in the chart. You'll see there's, the first line is our initial disbursement. That's how much it costs us to get 110 phones. There are about 100 sets that we use day to day and 10 spares to use for swapping them out. That's our initial disbursement. The second line is 2 years worth of service. So that is an entire 2 years of our monthly fees for the 100 active sets.
Okay, so that, thank you, through you, that's the monthly cost of those phones, assuming we get free ones.
Correct, yes. So
Okay.
we've done a total cost of ownership. Every different phone company has different ways that they slice and dice how much it costs you. Some of the phones are more expensive up front, but the service is less expensive. So we've eliminated that by doing a total cost of ownership analysis.
Okay. And one more question, thank you, through you, Chair. Am I going to have to call you every time I want to go to a Sabres game?
Sorry, that's funny because I've been on the other end of that phone call. No, actually, the new program we're on now adds travel packs by itself, and we've automated quite a few functions where we don't have to have such a hands-on approach to our cellular devices. There's a lot more automation that comes with this particular renewal.
Okay, thank you very much. Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Pachariva?
Yeah, thanks through you, Chair Timmers, to Mr. Brown. When working with Rogers, can we request new lines? And the reason I ask is because the majority of my calls to my town cell phone are for the previous user from credit card companies, from bank companies, from you name it, looking for this deadbeat, this scofflaw. Can we get fresh ones, like, you know, where the call comes about 20 times a day, and finally I call back and I go, who are you looking for? This is Councillor Pachariva from the town of Lincoln. We're looking for Mulva Jones. I said, this is not Mulva Jones. So,
Absolutely, Councillor, through you, Ms. Chair. We have part of the old and new contract is we can change the number for nuisance phone calls. Rogers does that at no charge. Just let us know. We'll sort
but
that
I
out
mean,
for you.
can we not like block like
You can
fresh
block,
numbers?
just so you know, Counselor, you can block numbers yourself very easily. Anyone you don't want calling, just block them.
Okay.
I've blocked a couple. But you know our cell phone numbers are like recycled, right? So when you trade in a number, it gets reused, so all numbers are recycled. So. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, there being no further discussion, we have a motion to receive report FN 05-119 as information and approve the award of the service agreement of mobility fleet replacement and cellular services to Rogers Communications, Inc. at a total cost of $118,644.15. I require a mover for that motion. Councillor McPherson. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.2 FN-06-19, the Hydro Dividend Reserve Fund. Yes. Ms. Stefani, are you speaking to this report? Or?
Through
Yes?
you, Madam Chair, I think it's going to be a
Okay,
group effort.
very good. Do we have any questions regarding this report? My apologies, I was waiting for hands to go up. That's why I was pausing so long. Councillor Rajima.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. So I know that we've moved the earlier consent agenda item to item 7.4. We're going to be discussing that shortly. But, so my question through you, Madam Chair, to, I guess, the Director of Finance, is this a bit of a coincidence that we're proposing to do this? Or are we looking at doing this partially because of the changes to the region's funding for CIPs?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rajima. I think our CEO would like to comment.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to take a stab at starting to answer that question because I think it does dovetail onto that consent item that we have lifted. So some members of council will have read in this morning's paper that Niagara Region did make a change as a result of a budget surplus that they had experienced, adding $1.2 million to affordable housing and putting $600,000 back into their SNP program. We can definitely speak to that as we deal with that consent item. At the end of the day, I think it's more of a coincidence, Councillor, than it is anything else that we found that out this morning. It doesn't change staff's recommendation and the rationale for staff bringing forward this report, both in terms of forecasting what's coming before council and what's coming before us when we look at the types of developments, the types of incentives that we're going to have to look forward in the future. I had made a note earlier. I think we've in some ways become a symptom of our own success in terms of these incentive programs and the amount of development that is going on in the community. And so definitely staff are here to answer any specific questions. But to your specific question on this particular matter, it is more of a coincidence that media article this morning just came out and speaks to $600,000 back into the SNP program. That isn't a huge amount when you look at 12 municipalities and the types of projects that it does go to offset and fund, but it is a start, and it is better than what we anticipated as of Friday or as of last week, which was $0 into that program.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So that's good news because I'm supportive of all these incentive programs, and I'm happy to hear that the region's going to be putting something out, and I'm excited that we're going to be providing more funds to our own incentive programs here.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. So I would like to kind of stay on that same questioning as Councillor Injama has asked, just on a different tangent, I guess. So through you, Madam Chair, I don't know, I did send out an email, so if I ask a question, I'm always a proponent of asking a question in advance so that staff is not sitting there looking for questions. I did send out an email. I didn't really get a response, so if I ask a question that someone is offended by or doesn't have the information, I apologize in advance. So just with regard, I guess I'm glad to see that there seems to be a source that's coming before us to look at funding for the CIPs. I think we're all, all cognizant that CIPs have been around for quite some time. And I guess it speaks to what the CEO just spoke to, that now, whether it's through economic development or whatever, we seem to be having a success. I guess my only question is, through you, Madam Chair, the hydro dividend fund, the reserve fund, has been around for quite some time. It just didn't develop. And I think we're fortunate that we had it there to get $1 million for the Fleming Center. I don't know how we would have funded it without it, to be honest with you. But I guess I'm just a little confused as to why now. It just appears we have four requests in the queue. And I mean, to me, and I'm not trying to be critical, but it just appears that we just woke up to realize we don't have the funding. What have we been doing, through you, Madam Chair, maybe to the CEO or to the Director of Finance? Why is this just coming down now? Like, the CIPs have been around for a long time. Why are we just requesting through council that we transfer this 540,000 now because we realize we have a deficit.
Thank you, Councillor Bernay, through to the CAO to comment, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, again, I'm going to take a stab at answering this question, and I do thank the councillor for sending his just general inquiry as it relates to CIPs to staff over the weekend, and I do apologize that we didn't get back to him. This morning, staff did meet on this very issue, and I think one of the questions that, collectively we anticipated and we asked ourselves was very much that question that you're asking, Councillor, in terms of CIPs and the increase in CIPs that we've had that dates back to 2011 has increased exponentially. If we look at Beamsville, Vineland, our mixed-use CIPs over the last number of years, and then those that are coming. We've got a rural and an industrial CIP, and then, of course, we're looking at Prudhomes and what sort of programs for the higher density, the high-rise, we may look in that particular area. And we're going to get into more depth with council when we bring those CIP reports forward in terms of tax incremental financing or development charge grant programs that we then pay ourselves back for. But I think, the question and the comment I made previously around we've become more successful, and I think one of the symptoms of our own success is that now we actually have a glaring challenge in front of us. I don't want to say a problem because there's a lot of benefits to incentivizing into CIPs, but one of the glaring challenges that we have is figuring out how we actually fund those incentive programs. And I think over the last year and a bit, one of the things that we've been doing from a senior management perspective, but more so looking at it from a planning, finance, and CAO's office perspective is, so how are we going to fund our CIPs, and where do we have money? We do have the hydro dividend in terms of monies that have been put aside, and it is one that is sustainable and moving forward. I think the other answer probably to what's been happening in the past really stems from the fact that I think in the past we had programs that were very small in nature, facade or building improvement grants. So you're talking $10,000 or $12,000 at a time. And while I can't speak for what was happening here dating back to 2011, I think sometimes the focus is on those small programs, and let's kind of move along and fund those small programs, not realizing that at one point we are going to become successful with these programs. And so where's the money? And do we look at the taxpayer? Do we look at levying for these dollars versus looking at existing funds that we have? So this is one of the recommendations that we've got before council. But I think to answer your question, Councillor, I think it's one of those things that back in 11, 12, 13, 14, it probably wasn't on the radar quite the way it is now. And so now we're faced with a challenge. So I know both Ms. Dale and Ms. Stefani may have additional comments.
Thank you.
If I could just comment, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So I do appreciate the CEO's comments, and I like I said at the onset, I think we're all supportive of CIPs, but CIPs just didn't hatch. They've been around for a long time, and I guess I just have a concern. We all recognize that each of the CIPs have different types of criteria that determine, the eligibility of those. You just can't decide that you're going to give money here if the criteria doesn't meet. And so, certainly at the most recent Prudhomes public open house, there was a considerable discussion that night that I witnessed between a town staff representative and the developer, where he was making it quite clear that we'll be in front of this council in the very near future looking for Prudhomes CIP and looking for the support of this council. So, I'm fully supportive, and I thank you, Mr. CEO, for your response. But I guess I'm just, 2 years ago, we didn't have an economic development officer in this town. We do now. And I'm supportive of economic development, but I think we have to have a specific business case on where this funding is going to come from, and not just what appears to me to be a little bit of and I don't mean to be critical, but a little bit of a desperation that, we have these four applications in the queue, and where are we going to get the funding? Well, there's this money sitting here, let's go ask for the 540. Fully supportive of this transfer of money, but just want us to be all very cognizant that it doesn't stop here. We're going to be having a public meeting about the industrial and rural CIPs that we just had a presentation on, and then the Prudhomes CIP. So, you know, where's that money going to come from? So thank you very much for the explanation. I appreciate it.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think one of the, just briefly, because we also met on this item this morning, is the Prudhoe CIP. And I think one of the pushbacks that we are actually going to be having with the particular developer is that CIPs aren't necessarily in place just to help offset every sort of development. There are very strict criteria. The criteria has everything to do with the type of development, the LEED certification, all those other things that go into it. And it's definitely meant to incentivize the more difficult type of development. That's typically the higher rise things, the things that are in later phases. So notwithstanding, I think sometimes some of the excitement in our development group and some of the things that are often said, we're definitely going to be having a very real conversation. Again, trying to be supportive, trying to move things forward, but looking at where do we want to incentivize the Main Street corridor potentially, and the mixed use in that Main Street corridor, not just a blanket CIP for something like Prudhoe's.
Okay, good. Ms. Dale or Ms. Safandi, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, in regards to the CIPs, there's actually a report on the upcoming Planning Economic Development Committee, which actually looks at, based on the completed projects, how much money the town has spent to date. So between 2012 and 2018, it was roughly a couple $100,000 spent, because they were primarily smaller type applications. So as our CIO pointed out, we're starting to get more interest in some of the bigger projects, and we kind of anticipated that at some point this is going to happen. And as a result of getting quite a few applications fairly recently, we felt it was prudent for staff to, to look at the funding and how we're going to fund those things. Also, as part of the report that's being considered next week, we're also looking at some minor changes to the program offerings that will also reduce the impact. So currently, for example, an applicant can apply for both tax increment financing, which is a grant on the increase in taxes, so they get a grant towards that, and also a DC reduction grant. As staff, we're looking at, in the future, the applicant would have to choose one or the other, so that will also help with the funding over the long term. The other thing to point out is we also look at this, we also look at these applications, we look at what's the current assessment. So just to kind of give you a quick snapshot, with some of the projects that are in the works right now, the existing assessed value is about $2.75 million. If we look at the potential assessment when all of these projects are going to be completed, now mind you, it's going to be 2 or 3 years from now before some of these projects are completed, because they are fairly substantial. The estimated assessment value is probably at that time going to be closer to $100 million. So the town share of that is roughly 30%. So over time, we actually could see an increase in taxes on an annual basis of over $400,000.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Dale. I see Councillor Mikulik is next. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through you to staff, I got one question here regarding through every dollar spent in a CIP assistance, the community sees $13 back in economic activity, and then further on 17 back in. Where do these numbers come from? How do we arrive to those numbers? It's in the conclusion of that report. How do we calculate?
Who would like to answer that? Ms. Dale?
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair. So what staff does is staff actually looks at what did it cost the applicant to do all of their works and construct the buildings. So we look at that versus the amount of funding that was provided by the town. So that's where that number comes from.
Okay, and then one more question. So developers approach us, small business approaches us for a grant or a interest-free loan, am I correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, all of the grants that are currently provided are actually grants. We don't have any interest-free loan programs currently.
Okay. So, thank you, but other municipalities, I believe, they have an offering of, say, an interest-free loan as part of a community improvement plan program, if I'm not mistaken. And then, if I may, one more question, just the allocation of those funds, when they're distributed, what is the timeline? So the application is made, council receives that application, council approves that application. When do the funds get released so that we're not just offering money?
Through you, Madam Chair. So with any application, the applicant has to, if it's a development charge reduction, for example, when they take out their building permit, they have to pay their development charges. Or if it's a tax increment financing grant or any other type of grant, they have to finish all the works. So all the site works have to be done, all the building has to be done. There has to be paperwork provided to ensure that they did what they said they're going to do and they're still eligible for their grant. So in some cases, it depends on the scale of the project. In some cases, they might be completed within a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years. With the tax increment financing ones, the property also has to be reassessed by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC. So sometimes it can be up to 3 years or more before they start getting their grants, even though they would have had to pay taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion to approve the use of hydro dividend funds to support the town's community improvement programs, and approve the immediate transfer of $540,000 from the hydro dividends fund to the Community Improvement Plan Reserve Fund, and approve the transfer of the yearly dividend from the hydro dividends fund to the Community Improvement Plan Reserve Fund for the duration of the next 5 years, and that it then be revisited for continuation thereafter. I would require a mover for this motion. Councillor Rajima? All those in favor? Those opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.3 FN-07-19, 2020 budget schedule. I was really surprised to see a budget schedule already. Any questions from committee? Oh, I see Councillor Rajima.
Not a question, just a point that you just made as well, is that we do talk about budget all year round, and thank you to staff for bringing that forward, because it makes for lighter work later in the year.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we did talk about this quite a bit at the budget, the previous budget, and pleased to see that we're going to get out of the gate real early on this one. So, just for my little bugaboo, so where do we fit in the discussion around the 10-year capital plan and its firmness for the next year, 2 years, 3 years? Is that part of the one-on-one ward meetings, or is that a general expectation that we are going to have that down in the November timeframe? How does that fit?
Okay, thank you, Councillor McPherson. Through to Ms. Safani, if you could comment on
Yes.
on those questions.
Through you, Madam Chair. The capital plan is still coming forward. It's going to be coming to General Business and Finance as a separate report, not necessarily as part of the budget process, because this is a tool to help with the budget process. And that's coming in, we're looking at June, early, or July for that meeting. in advance of the budget process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mary Easton?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I also had a question about the timing. I'm glad that we're starting in June. However, the strategic plan has now been delayed. So if Mr. CEO could just explain to us how he thinks the two are going to come together, because I think it does have an impact on the capital budget.
Mr. Kirkopoulos?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff were talking about just that a little earlier today in light of the fact that we were looking at scheduling that meeting into May. I think, there's definitely a desire to move forward and to get that done quickly. There's also a desire to make sure that we work with schedules, and we heard back from a few members of council. And so while that is being pushed out later in May, it's definitely an essential portion, and it's an essential piece of what we're doing in terms of looking at both our mission, vision, and values, and specifically the community vision and how those council priorities fit into that. And definitely, before we do any surveying, before we go out, I know Ms. Beattie highlighted earlier to me that, albeit the schedule is fluid, we wouldn't want to be out there conducting public online surveys until we have priorities set. So we're definitely going to, it will be fluid, and we're definitely going to adjust some timelines to make sure that those priorities are set, and then things start flowing out of there for council.
Okay, so Madam Chair, if I could just get clarification. I believe the date through you to the CAO, is it May 25th now? Am I stretching it a bit? Is it, what is the date for?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can definitely look it up, but I think Ms. Kirkolos has it at her fingertips now, so I'll let her answer that question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are a couple of dates being proposed. I'm just waiting to hear back from the consultant, but the dates that are being proposed for council are May 22nd and May 27th. And I'm just waiting to hear back from the consultant, and then once she gives the go-ahead, I will definitely send out a poll of council to ensure that we have quorum to move forward.
Okay, well, Madam Chair, I'm having difficulty with those dates through you to the CAO. Could we bear down on this a bit? Those dates are really out there. And what'll end up happening, I fear, Madam Chair, is that we're really going to be pushing ourselves, and instead of doing the work and giving a thoughtful approach to this, we're really going to be pushing ourselves to meet that deadline. That date does not satisfy me.
Okay. Through to the clerk.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, so the consultant regretfully had to inform us that she's had a family emergency to deal with. Her husband has been extremely ill. So we were going to move forward at the end of April, and I did work with the mayor's office to ensure your availability in that calendar for the May 22nd and the 27th timeframe, and that is the earliest possible date right now that we can put on the calendar.
Well, that's too bad, Madam Chair, and I'm very sorry for the consultant, definitely. I mean, those kinds of things are very difficult to deal with at the best of times. I think maybe Mr. Kirkopoulos has something to say.
Okay,
Through you, Madam Chair, why don't Ms. Kirkolos and I, have a further conversation and just make sure that there aren't other dates in the midst of that, looking at the May 2-4 weekend, and I think some scheduling conflicts with members of council. Our goal is to make sure every member of council was there, and so I think, again, trying to coordinate all of those schedules has been challenging, but why don't Julie and I have another conversation later today or early tomorrow, and just make sure that we can't do anything more in terms of moving that forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Seeing no other questions? We have a motion to approve Report FN 07-19 and Appendix A, schedule for the Town of Lincoln's 2020 capital and operating budget. I require a mover for this motion. Councillor Russell? All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.4, memorandum regarding regional incentive funding. Ms. Safani, are you speaking to that report, or Ms. Dale?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the initial purpose of this memo was to indicate that the region back in February had advised us that they were not going to provide any matching funding for any of the CI programs that they currently do. So based on, I guess, the news story that came out this morning, they're looking at providing some funding. I think from a staff point of view, we do have probably at least one application that would have fallen through the cracks with the region canceling their funding. So I think at this point, what staff have to do is follow up with the region to determine, you know, with some of these applications that are in process as to which ones they're going to actually provide funding for. Because what normally happens is the region will require the town on a quarterly basis to provide an inventory of applications that are in process, estimated funding, and they will anticipate, but they will then use that, you know, to figure out, you know, how they can allocate their portion of the funding. So at this point, now that we know that they're going to get some additional funding, we'll have to follow up further with the region to see, you know, what sort of applications they're going to fund at the town level.
Thank you very much. Did you have comments now through to CAO?
Through you, Madam Chair, I did provide it in my previous answer to Councillor Brunet, and Ms. Dale just touched on it now, but $600,000 was re-put back in to reestablish the incentive program for municipalities. So we do need to get more information. We haven't received anything official other than the media story that is currently before us, but that is a surplus, and instead of putting it in the tax stabilization fund, the region did decide to fund $1.2 million towards Niagara Regional Housing, and then the $600,000, as I highlighted, to the SNP program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos. And next I have Mayor Easton.
Madam Chairman, just from the regional councillor perspective, there was a change in, I wouldn't say it was a change in ideology, but a change in attitude about not only these grants, but also a number of committees that came forward to be disbanded. In the last term, we were not able to get the focus that we wanted on the benefit to the municipalities. However, it's my understanding, and it certainly was discussed through the budget process, that some of those committees that we thought were going to be lost, we were able to get a motion through to support their survival. And there's also going to be more discussion about this topic as well. So I think that there should be a better result in the 2020 year. It was just one of those things, and the votes were there, and we lost. So we'll be watching it.
Anyone else? There being no further discussion, we have a motion. Receive and file item 7.4, memorandum regarding regional incentive funding. I require a mover for this motion. Councillor McPherson. All those in favor? And those opposed? That is carried. There are no confidential items to consider. Do we have any staff remarks? Seeing none. Do we have any committee remarks? There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.